So what goes into a UX strategy? And I think this is the thing that is really tough to find out. So it contains a roadmap. That's what a lot of people would say. And again, I'm like, okay, it contains a roadmap, but okay, is that it? I thought product managers make roadmaps. UX strategists make roadmaps. What's going on? I don't understand. Are you just giving a lot of to-dos? You just adding to-do lists, the design team? Why is it just a roadmap? And this is also a bit a topic of confusion. More than a roadmap, I would say that a UX strategy uses actionable policy and design to address organizational challenges. Now, that actionable policy, we're going to zoom in and spend a lot of time on because I think this might be new to you. And policy design is a really interesting field. They can help you in so many ways. You can really scale your impact if you know a little bit about policy design. Of course, it's still a design strategy. The UX strategy is a design strategy, and you use design still, design sensibilities, UX sensibilities. And the thing here that's different is organizational challenges. So we're not just talking about user challenges anymore. We're kind of turning our lens inward. So keep that in mind as we talk about this. What goes into a UX strategy? Here's one of the best frameworks I can give you to determine and kind of guide what you should put in a UX strategy. This gives you a little bit more of a concrete example. This is the kernel of a good strategy. Comes from Richard Rummelt, the author of Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. I like this one a lot because the way that Richard Rummelt approaches a strategy, he talks about it as a problem solving, as a design, as a lot of words that I find very conducive to things we do as designers. So it's the diagnosis. We're making sure to diagnose the problem we're trying to overcome. A lot of people skip this. What's the nature of the challenge? We're not just jumping to solutions. Then there's the guiding policy, kind of the heart of the strategy. Our basic approach is this, and that will guide our actions. So we have coherent actions, which that's really important that the actions are all doing the same thing. So think of it like waves hitting the shore from an ocean, like they're all hitting and they're wearing down the rocks eventually. That's what you want to be doing with the strategy. So you're going to do focus, and the policy guides the actions. So this is a pretty good start. If you don't know what to do with the strategy, you can start here. But I'm going to zoom in a little bit on policy because I think it's super exciting. A course or principle of action adopted or proposed by an organization or individual. Now, this is where you get to the real heart of strategic design. Notice the words that are similar there, principles and procedure. I'd kind of put principles a little bit more general on the side. I'd put procedure a little bit more specific, kind of on either side of policy. So you could kind of go either side of that, and they act like guidelines and guardrails. That's what policy should do. And what's cool about policy is that it's intentionally vague. You make policy vague on purpose because you want it to guide lots of different types of people. And if you make it overly prescriptive, if you say like, we're going to work on this feature and that feature, then it's not as easy to guide. And the point of a policy is to drive actions that kind of go in the same like system direction. So let's keep that system direction thing in mind. Policy would be Yoda, action would be Luke Skywalker. You know how Yoda is? He's like, I've been training you Jedis for all my life. I'm not going to develop a specific policy for you, Luke Skywalker. You're too old to start the training. So I'm just going to tell you the same stuff I always tell the kids. It's like the kind of universal things that we use to guide people to the right Jedi path. So think about it like that. That's what your policy should be doing. Policy should be piggybacking on your action. They're very connected. They need each other. So here's a Yoda situation. So these two are kind of teaming up in the same manner. So this is Brian Eno. Don't know if you've heard of him. His music is amazing. He's a big thought leader in artistic direction and things like that. And this is Dan Hill. Dan Hill is one of my favorite authors of strategic design. Pick up his book, Dark Matter and Trojan Horses. It's amazing. Probably the first book you should read if you're interested in strategy. I'll link that later at the end of the talk. But look at this. So it's design principles for the street. Brian Eno wrote this. And he wrote the principles because he was going to use it like policy to guide Dan Hill's work. So Brian Eno's a musician. He's super interesting. Dan Hill is actually, he runs the innovation lab of the country of Sweden. So he's working in these gigantic problem spaces, trying to improve urban life inside Sweden's cities. And he wanted to get a little bit of inspiration from someone outside of this kind of scientific, engineering focused urban planning kind of scene that he was in. So he's like, okay, I want to talk with artists. So Brian Eno came up with this. Think like a gardener, not an architect. Design beginnings, not endings. Unfinished equals fertile. Make places that are easy for people to change and adapt, like with wood and plaster as opposed to steel and concrete. And this, if you look at it, it kind of spurs deeper thought. It immediately makes you think of things you can do, but it also makes you stop and think. And it's very memorable. There's a lot more of these, by the way. You can see the article, it's on there to the side. Definitely check it out if you want to read more about it. But I want to show you what Dan Hill did with this. So this is the guiding policy, and here's the coherent action. It says, welcome to the experiment. What they did is they used timber to build spaces in the street. These spaces were designed by the citizens living there. They were sort of designed on an iPad, and then they're kind of being prototyped on the street because they're not sure if this is going to be the right thing. This is kind of the phase one. This is coherent action number one. And they actually have coherent action number 2 and 3 already planned if coherent action 1 goes well. So it's almost like a roadmap, but it's kind of like building, you're kind of like phase 1 at this point. And they did it out of timber because normally people use concrete and that's super permanent. So in this way, we can build things, unfinished equals fertile, So that's how he's kind of interpreting it. And that's a good example of how policy can feed into action. Here's a more specific one. So this one comes from the Field Guide to UX Strategy, used as a kind of top example of what a UX strategy kind of could be. I think this is a good guiding policy. So carve it up. Let users slice available statistics in any way that might be helpful so that analysis can be done in a timely manner. Now imagine you're a designer and this is your UX strategy. So what will that do? What's the coherent action that would be involved? I'm going to show you 2 options, and I want you to tell me which one is more of a coherent action for this guiding policy. First one, carve it up. Does this represent carve it up to you? You can call this option 1. Is option 1, carve it up? Is that related to this policy? What about this one, option 2? Is this related to the policy? Which one do you think would be a better coherent action for the policy of carve it up? This one, option 1, or option 2? What do you think? A little background, this is Google Data Studio, which does allow you to really customize things. So if you knew that, you might go, that might be a little bit more carve it up, but I didn't give you any context. I wanted you to know how it feels when you're trying to make a design decision and you don't have a policy to guide you versus when you do. It can be kind of difficult to make decisions. So that's really the power of a UX strategy. Here's another one from gov.uk. Do the hard work to make it simple. Making something look simple is easy. Making something simple to use is much harder. There's an insight there, especially when the underlying systems are complex. But that's what we should be doing. Don't take it's always been that way for an answer. It's usually more and harder work to make things simple, but it's the right thing to do. Well, okay, so some real opinions here. You can tell that's written by somebody who has felt the pain of making things simple. Now, I like this format. This is what you see quite a bit. You'll see this for values and principles and policy and all those kind of things. It's like the memorable top and then kind of explaining it and linking to more to learn about it. But I like the way they're handling this. It's a nice one. So do the hard work to make it simple. What do you think? Did they succeed? Did they do the hard work to make it simple? This is a government website, by the way. Those are classically very terrible. Allow me to add Exhibit B from the US. This is the Department of Motor Vehicles. Now, they, as far as I know, do not have a UX strategy. At least it doesn't seem like it, and I haven't been able to find one. They do. And I think you can see how that guiding policy can really create a lot of coherent action. Government websites are classically not always the best, but I think it's interesting when they're taking this guiding policy seriously. They're trying to actually show their work. It's hard to find these for companies because if it's a really good strategy, you don't want to share it because it could be a competitive advantage. But for some government websites, for some projects, you can find them. So gov.uk is a great one to take a look at. Again, the strategy kernel can really help you out. Diagnosis, the guiding policy, and the coherent actions. So that could be kind of how you structure the actual document. But I want to give you a little bit more kind of examples of what the UX strategy could physically look like. So even overstatements are really nice. These are actually from the Fountain Institute. So those are a nice little format. So something, even over something else. It forces you to make a trade-off, which I think is really helpful. Paragraph is totally fine. Some people say try and do it in 35 words or less. They didn't here, but I think this shortness is good. strategy statement is a nice format. You do the goal, you do the scope, you do the capabilities, and that helps you kind of use the right things for a strategy. And then gov.uk actually did posters. So there's a lot of ways you can kind of visualize, you can materialize these guiding policy. Feel free to get creative, but a lot of times it is text, right? So something to be aware of. A lot of times the guiding policy is just memorable phrases. The coherent action formats, Gantt chart, that could be kind of how it looks. Pretty typical if you're doing some sort of long-term roadmap. I would recommend Kanban board, maybe some experiments that you're going to run. That's probably better than a Gantt chart from the way that I see UX strategy. You could, of course, do a physical map, and that digital whiteboard is just something like Miro, right? But these are some examples of how you could visualize, materialize those coherent actions that I was talking about. And of course, you are a designer, so you should also be kind of visualizing the concept. A strategy should kind of be a model. It should be a new way to understand things. So you should visualize that model, right? And there's a lot of ways you can do that. Classic business analyst kind of strategy charts here. Like this is the Blue Ocean strategy canvas, but they're always using these charts that don't have any actual numbers, but they kind of look like they're quantitative, but really they're qualitative. So that's a pretty classic business consultant move. You can use qualitative diagrams. This is an article I wrote, talks about all the different types you can use. I see this a lot. There's a lot of UX maturity stages when people do UX strategies. I think it's just sort of like goes with the territory. Models are super helpful. They help you kind of visualize things simply. You could make a concept image, Photoshop something together even, you've got some skills. Or data, of course. Definitely want to link to the data to show and prove the things that you're discovering. And when you want to get your team on board, it's helpful to let them kind of dive through the data that you uncovered, let them kind of discover what you discovered. So the medium, you will hear lots of different things. So I hate to be overly prescriptive here, but I would say start with a document, a living, breathing document. So that could be a Google document, that could be a Notion document, whatever you want to do. But I would probably start there. Most people will tell you something like 2 pages, limit it. You want to give yourself some boundaries because it can get a little bit too intense when you're creating UX strategy. A lot of people will do slide decks, and do videos. Maybe they'll use a Miro board to kind of show their UX strategy, maybe something in FigJam. A physical board is cool. It's good to have something in the office when you walk in, if you do that kind of thing and go into the office. Of course, there's also printed posters. And I think if you really want to go fancy, there's the physical object. So it can be a really cool design challenge to see, can I imbue this policy into an object? And that's what a lot of strategic designers will do. They'll go like super big, even artists do this a lot. So that can be kind of a fun way to get some inspiration. But I would say start with a document. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of concreteness to a UX strategy. And it's really tough to find them. I know I've been looking for the past 3 months for examples. Most of them are very bad. A lot of them are just like a canvas with a bunch of post-its thrown on it, and they're calling that a UX strategy. But I don't think you would ever share that with a business leader. I think you want to make sure that you put it in something a little nicer. So these are some inspiration for that.